What's up guys, Kevin from Epic Gardening here. And do you want more birds in your garden? Now this is something I think a lot of people are maybe a little confused about because they think, oh, they're coming in, they're eating my berries, they're poking holes in my tomatoes, they're causing a mess. Why would I want more birds in my garden? Well, there are 3 reasons why, at least in my opinion, and then we're gonna get into, after I've sold you on why you might want birds in your garden, how to actually get them there. But first, let me bring you back to this summer when I actually did cultivate a lot of local birds in my front yard urban garden, just kind of show you some of the cool aspects of that. So I have a bed back here of flowering mustard, spinach, and lettuce, and look what I found hanging out here. Say hello. This is what happens when you do it the permaculturist way. You get little guys like this coming back to the garden, eating the bugs for you, cleaning out those slugs, cleaning off those aphids. And this is a little boy. Say hi to everyone. He's just hanging out next to my drip line. And so this is literally in a front yard, in an urban environment in San Diego. So that was pretty cool. That was just one of the many types of birds that were in the front yard throughout the entire summer into fall. And even now there are still some. They're not nesting right now, but there are still some. So we're gonna get into the 3 things you need to consider when it comes to actually cultivating a garden that's attractive to birds. Your overall landscape, your water, your food, and your shelter. So let's kick it off with the overall landscape. So when it comes to your overall environment, what I've noticed that helps is just mimicking nature. And a lot of it does come down to mimicking nature when it comes to gardening, right? Because we're dealing with natural processes. Birds like shelter. So this loquat tree right here, even though I've pruned it back pretty heavily, has been a really good spot for my birds to hang out. I have a shrub right over there that you can see. They like to hang out there as well. There's another plant right here that they like to hang out in. And then something really interesting is there is a section of my garden that I'm still working on, which is right down here. You can see it. And it looks a little bit sloppy, it looks a little bit messy, because it is. But I've noticed that mourning doves are really coming in and kind of combing through there for pincher bugs and all sorts of different things. And they've been, number 1, cleaning up my insect population, and number 2, that's been a learning lesson for me. That type of environment seems to be one that they like to spend time in. So overall, let's go back to it. Mimic that natural environment. Give them cover, give them protection, give them shade, and now we're gonna get into giving them water. So it's really important to give your birds something to drink, because a lot of the times people get annoyed with birds in the garden because the birds will poke holes in their tomatoes, and then not only do they have a ruined tomato, they sort of just are a little sour on their gardening experience. Well, part of the reason why birds are doing that is not necessarily because they're hungry. Now, of course, they'll be eating berries. Birds are big berry fans, but other plants, sometimes they poke into those simply because they're thirsty. Now, you can solve that by providing them a bird bath. So this is one that Brandon from Happy Gardens sent out. So they are the sponsors of today's video. So thanks to Happy Gardens for sending out both the bird bath and the bird house, which we'll see in a little bit. But really, you can get bird baths from quite a few places. If you'd like, you can just build your own as well. I do, however, like this. Let's talk about some of the considerations when it comes to the design of the bird bath you'll want, and also the placement of your bird bath. So number 1, you're gonna want it to be relatively shallow. You don't want it to be hyper deep because it's just not as accessible for the birds. Number 2, you want the slope to be somewhat gradual. It's going to be easier for them to access the water that way. Number 3, it's sometimes nice to have a bit of a textured pattern or something for them to, there to be a little bit more friction so they're not slipping and sliding. They're probably not going to want to roost or hang out there as much if it's just baby smooth and they're just likely to slip all over the place. Now, if you're in an area that does get a bit of a freeze, I'm not in that area, I'm in San Diego Zone 10B, you can opt for a heated bird bath. So that's one option if you want to encourage birds throughout the winter. That's going to keep it from freezing, which is of course not conducive to giving birds water, right? The only other thing I'll say is you'll want to clean this out and refill it probably once a week or so, and you'll want to place it in an area where there's a decent amount of cover. Birds want to feel comfortable when they're in the garden, so you want to make sure that they aren't feeling threatened, exposed to other types of predators. So for me, I've had a lot of success putting it in the shade or a shaded spot, somewhere under a tree. So they have some environmental cover, they also have some sun cover, makes them feel a little bit more comfortable. I've noticed that if I do that versus just putting it straight in the sun, I get a lot better results. So that's it for water to attract birds in the garden. Now we're gonna get into food right above me in this bird feeder. So as you can see, I have a pretty classic bird feeder here, kind of like the basic level status, and it's basically just some seed mix. Obviously birds like different seeds, they like different types of food, berries, bugs, etc. Now what we're gonna do is really quickly, I found a really cool tool that tells you the types of birds that you're likely to find in your region and then what types of food those birds like. So then you can start thinking about using the bird feeders and especially the feed itself that's likely to attract the bird that you want in your garden. So let's cut to that real quickly.
As far as food sources, we already talked about the ways that you can set a feeder up and what types of food you can put in the feeder. But again, if you want to get more specific, here's another cool tool. This is yardmap.org. All the links will be in the description, guys. What you can do is you can choose your region and you can choose the food type and it'll tell you what birds prefer that. So let's go ahead and do this. West, I want to see what birds prefer insects. So let's go ahead and just click on this guy here. Mountain chickadee likes the fruit of poison ivy, sumacs, wild cherries, bayberries. So it looks like it enjoys quite a bit of berries. Let's click this guy. Black-capped chickadee, again, berries. Looks like maybe these birds prefer more berries than insects. Oh, there you go. Hairy woodpecker, bark and wood-boring beetle larva. Makes sense based on the type of bird that it is. Beech nuts and other arthropods. So here's an interesting technique. Maybe you have a particular pest that you have quite a bit of issues with, and you want to bring in some environmental controls like birds instead of having to spray all the time. Well, you can get in here and really get really granular and say, okay, I live in the western United States. I have this problem. Let me find a bird that eats the insect that maybe I'm struggling with, and let me create an environment around that bird and try to bring that specific bird in. So pretty cool tools here.
So hopefully that tool was helpful for you. As you can see, I'm kind of going after those smaller songbirds, and we'll see in a second also when we're talking about the shelter, I'm definitely targeting those smaller songbirds. So a hanging feeder underneath the tree with some seeds is going to be just fine for me, but if you wanted to go more all around, you would probably want to do some sort of hanging cedar. You'd want to do a hummingbird feeder for sure, good pollinators in the garden, and maybe a suet feeder or one of those like seed bricks, maybe one with some fruit as well to target the ones that like fruit. Maybe steer them away from those berries that you might be growing in the garden. So now we're actually going to talk about probably the most important and maybe even the most confusing part, which would be how do you actually encourage them to settle, to nest and reproduce in your garden. This is why you sometimes don't put it up into a tree, because you've got a little squirrel boy. Well, we're at birdhouses, guys. Probably my favorite part of just the whole equation of attracting birds into the garden. This is the Charlemagne birdhouse from happygardens.com. So again, thanks to Brandon for sending that out and sponsoring the video. But let's first talk about, it's not necessarily about the aesthetics. I personally think this one looks really cool, but that's fine and dandy until no birds come and actually nest in the house. Then it's just an aesthetic piece and it really has no function in the garden as far as I'm concerned. So there is a really cool tool I found. It's called Right Bird, Right House. It tells you exactly what birds you're gonna find in your region and then how to target them based on the house. So the specifications, how big of an opening hole it needs, where it needs to be placed, how far it needs to be placed away from certain things, the direction that it should be facing the sun. Pretty interesting stuff. So let's cut to that clip real quick, then we'll come back and talk about this house in particular and finish out the video.
So if you're curious about how to pick the perfect birdhouse for either a specific bird that you're targeting or your region, I found a really cool tool called nestwatch.org. And what you can do here is you can come through and let's go ahead and click my area, California, and my primary habitat. I live in an urban area, so it's going to be a town. And so we'll click see results. And what it does here is it pulls in the birds that are most likely to be found in your region. And then it tells you, first of all, it'll tell you if it's a species in decline. So maybe you want to target a species that's in decline and try to boost that species up. That's up to you. But it'll tell you the bird's name, where to attach the nest box to, and it also has a couple other little modifiers here as far as, you know, maybe how difficult it is or if it's a kid-friendly bird. So it's a really cool tool. Now, for me, you can see there's about 8 birds that are common in my area. I know for sure I've seen a house wren in my yard, and I've also seen a mourning dove. Now, this is a larger one, and I don't have a house that's going to target the mourning dove that well. So I'm going to target the house wren with the house that I have. Let's go ahead and click into the bird itself and see what happens. So it looks like you can actually just download plans here, which is pretty cool. But let's go ahead and look at what else we see. So it tells us the nesting range almost all of the United States except for the southeast. Now, nesting habitat, it's a town, so it qualifies there. It tells us where to attach. I am probably going to attach it to my house, so we have the building right there. And then you have your nesting period. So it's November, December right now, so it's not really the best time to actually get nesting, but at least if I set the box up, then by the time that spring, summer rolls around, we're going to be in a good spot. Now, it gives you some really cool stuff. So your nest height placement, 5 to 10 feet, your minimum spacing from woody areas, 100 feet, and facing, the direction that it should be facing. Now, fortunately, the house wren's a pretty easy one to target because you can face it anywhere. Now, this is the really interesting part. This is the part where I think a lot of people might buy a birdhouse and not really have any idea why it's not working. And part of this is because you do have to get a little specific. The entrance hole definitely matters. For a house wren, it seems like an entry hole of 1 inch matters, and larger is a detriment because that means that larger birds or predators could make their way in and actually attack the nest. The depth, about 8 inches, and then 5.5 by 5.5. So the house that I have is going to be completely fine for that. And then as far as helpful tips, this is just such a cool tool. It gives you all these little tips for the exact bird that you're targeting. Like, look at this. Male house wrens typically defend more than one cavity and may fill all of the nest boxes with twiggy mock nests. Pretty interesting, right? So anyways, let's get back to the video, but I wanted to bring that tool to you guys because I found it really helpful when I was researching birds for my area.
So you guys can see, here's the bottom of my bed here, and it's about 6 feet up, which is right in that middle range of targeting the house wren. The Charlemagne feeder right here has a 1.25 inch hole right here and a slightly smaller one here. The wren wants about 1 inch. I think we'll be fine with this sort of hybrid mixture right here. And it'll mount on a couple different things. So I've mounted it to this shingled wall, which, you know, might think, oh, that's a little risky, but the mounting bracket is pretty nice. You slot it into 2 holes right here and right here. And then right in here is how you screw that together, and then it just attaches to the back. So it's pretty neat. And then if we were to pop the back off, what we would see is the cleaning panel in the back. So you can see pretty cool features and accents just from an aesthetics perspective. You've got these pine shingles. It's really, really well made, especially for how intricate it is. And if that's something you care about, if you want something really cool looking, really epic, then I would highly suggest at least giving Happy Gardens a check. If you'd like to make your own, I've also left some links in the description for that as well. But anyways, it's a really cool house, and I'm super excited to see how the house wren is going to respond to this. Of course, it's not quite time yet. We need a little bit more time to get them into nesting season, so we're not quite there, but really excited to see how that goes. So, boom. Birds in the garden, guys. If you have comments on this, if you have questions, if you have observations, experiences on how you got birds in your garden successfully, please let me know. Drop them in the comments down below. Would always like to find out more about birds in the garden because I'm all about building that ecosystem, baby. So, as I close it out for today, good luck in the garden, keep growing. I'll see you on future videos, and please definitely stay tuned because I've got a really big announcement coming up for 2019. All right, peace out, guys. So here's my front yard. Above me, tons and tons of birds hang out all day. So they have some shelter, some high ground protection right there. But in here, I've created just a little bit of an environment for them to potentially make their new home.